Let me say welcome to all of you who are here. We will talk about from peatlands to policy, how praxis can guide EU CRCF certification. My name is Gerald Jurasinski. I'm Professor of Peatland Science in the University of Greifswald, and together with my colleague Irina Reiskaya, we organized this session. And we have a very interesting setup here. We have, next slide please, the organization of the session. I can change this myself, yes. I was not identifying this as the slide changer. So we will have first this overview and also check whether we can use the interactive tools with the Mentimeter, whether we can all do that and are comfortable with it. But then we will have a keynote speech by Joosten. And then we will have roundtable discussions, and therefore you are sitting a little bit crazy right now, because the idea is that we don't have then to move chairs in between, and you already sit there where you can have the discussions. And then we will inform from the roundtable the panel discussions, and we have some more panelists I will discuss or I will introduce to you before the roundtable, so that you already know these people and know what they are up to and what are their claims, and you can discuss those claims in the roundtables. And then, of course, there is a wrap-up planned. So, let's try the Mentimeter stuff. And also, there's already a question here. Yes, what's one word that comes to your mind when you think about CRCF and peatlands? I don't say an example here, because otherwise this might be, of course, an influencing what you put in here. I hope that the IT then also has this connection to the Mentimeter so that you can have a look at the results. So I see that people wrote something and did something. Yes. Oh, that's interesting. High potential. Rewetting, of course, yes. And I like how that's moving, so it's already like pointing to the dinner. Will there be some dance actually with the dinner? I don't know. Opportunity is also here. Yes. We need more clarity.
Clearly why I go.
Yes. But it's very clear, if we want to have CRCF from peatlands, we have to do one thing before. We have to do rewetting. That's very clear here. At least that's obvious from this word cloud stuff. So that worked out well. I'm very happy about that. So we can go back to the slides. Yes. And so we will have now a talk by Joosten, who has been professor of peatlands and paleoecology at the University of Greifswald until his retirement, but he's very active still. He has been and is still very active in communicating to the public and to politics the relevance of peatlands, and is one of the fathers of the recognition of peatlands we see today, I would say. So I would also ask you to clap your hands, because this is really important what he's doing. And we are here because of you, yes? Among others, of course. Also, he is focusing on building the biggest knowledge database on peatlands. It's a library, yeah? The Peatland and Nature Conservation International Library, PENSIL. And therefore, he's here today. He's an A-type member of the CRCF expert group of the European Commission that tries to drive this certification. And now I ask you to come to the stage and do your talk. And I hope that IT will take care that your slides will be visible over there.
I hope that also.
You can slides change with this nice thing. Next and back is very easy.
Good.
Peatlands and CRCF, effective solutions for complex problems. This is Yuri Kazak. He is a member of the indigenous people of the Yukagir in northeast Yakutian, and he was the guide in my first Arctic expedition. And I told him that I'm always afraid on such expeditions very far away of appendicitis. Because if you get appendicitis, it is very painful and you will die from it. And then he said, no problem, I'm a surgeon. He was the surgeon of the hospital of Čukurdag. And I said, but you do not have anything with you. That's not necessary, he said, because in Čukurdag we do not have an anesthetist. I always operate without anesthesia. And I have everything with me that is necessary. You need a knife, you need a bottle of vodka to sterilize the knife and to put the rest into the patient. You need 4 strong men to fix the legs and the arms. And you need a piece of wood to put between the teeth that you do not bite off your tongue. But then he said, it will be painful at first, but you will survive. I have never felt so safe and so secure than on this expedition and the later ones with him beside me. We have a similar problem, the problem of climate change. And it is a severe thing, so severe that in 2050 all countries of the world, countries that were in war with each other, decided unanimously that it had to stop. That we have to limit climate change to 1.5 or 2 degrees. This 1.5 or 2 degrees implies CO2 neutrality, net zero, by 2050 if we want to keep it at 1.5 degrees, and in 2070 if we want to reach 2 degrees. These numbers are informed by the enormous catastrophes that increase when we go beyond that, as we already experience. Because every ton of greenhouse gas more in the atmosphere makes the climate warmer. The question is not whether, but when to reach net zero. So we must stop talking about low-hanging fruits. Low-hanging fruits is a nice metaphor when you need a box of apples from a full tree, but now we are talking about picking all the apples from the entire tree. CRCF will first focus on emission reduction. Why? Because emission reduction from peatlands is per hectare 10 times more efficient for climate change mitigation than carbon sequestration. So we have to focus on reduction. And net zero means that every remaining emission has to be offset, and actually immediately, by a permanent and a new sink. That is the challenge. Because sinks hardly exist. The industrial sinks do not work and will not work on the sufficient scale until 2050. And the natural skills are also breaking together. And the few ones that still will be there will be used for keeping vital practices working. They will not be used for compensating peatland agriculture. Because we should not forget, in the European Union, peatlands emissions are agricultural emissions. 3% of the agricultural area of the European Union consists of organic soils, of peat soils, but they are responsible for 25% of all emissions from agriculture, including the emissions from burping cows and including the emissions from nitrous oxide. And if we take the top 7 of peatland countries in the European Union, you see it is even much worse. Peatland emissions are agricultural emissions. We are dealing with businesses, with enterprises. Net zero for peatland thus implies that we have to re-wet all drained peatland. And that is not more than 500,000 hectares of drained peatlands in the European Union every year until 2050. 500,000 hectares per year. How do we manage that? I'm first going to mention some problems that we are going to get and then come up with some rough solutions. Rewetting does not only stop CO2 emissions, but it also reinstalls methane emissions, and this is an inevitable collateral effect of carbon conservation and sequestration. You cannot have the one without the other. So you have peatlands that are drained and emit huge amounts of CO2, or you have peatlands that are rewetted and they emit small amounts of the strong gas methane. You have to choose between those options. But the choice is rather easy, because methane is a short-living greenhouse gas, a strong but a short-living, whereas carbon dioxide and also nitrous oxide is a weaker nitrogen oxide, of course, not much stronger, but a persistent greenhouse gas. And if you look what happens, if you re-wet, then the status quo is the gray line, and in the beginning the yellow line. If you then re-wet and you follow the yellow line, you see that it at first becomes a little bit worse for the climate because of this methane effect, but because the methane is breaking down to CO2, soon it will cross the line of the status quo. And even if you introduce an additional methane peak, like we sometimes have, 10 times higher than normal, the blue things, then you see it fades out, and only 10 years later it crosses the line. Methane is not the problem that we think it is, at least not in peatlands, because there it has to be balanced against the stopping of CO2 emissions, the persistent CO2 emissions. Of course, methane is a strong climate gas, and it has to be reduced, but the techniques for that are available, including shallow topsoil removal, but we have many more. I will not discuss that. The second point is CO2 emissions. There is a strong relationship between average water table depth and CO2 emissions. But there are two different contrasting models in place to show the relationship. The one to the left that you see that is sigmoid, and the one to the right is linear. The one to the left is the one that is used in German reporting, greenhouse gas reporting to UNFCCC. The right one is also a German one, but it is similarly used in Britain for greenhouse gas reporting. These are different models. Both of them have their scientific and pragmatic justification, but their implications for CRCF are enormous. Because if you take the sigmoid curve, raising the water level from minus 120 centimeters below surface to minus 40 centimeters below surface reduces 0 tons of CO2 emissions. Whereas if you adopt the linear curve, you see that for the same change in water level, you gain an emission reduction of 40 tons of CO2. That's a big difference. And also for baseline setting, it makes a huge difference, because in the left curve, and you can put the baseline wherever you want between 40 and 120, it will lead to the same reductions. So these scientific discussions have their immediate practical consequences. The next problem is that the global warming potential that the UNFCCC has chosen politically to adopt as a matrix for recalculating greenhouse gases is not suited for peatland emissions. IPCC writes that already in the first assessment report in 1992, that it is not suitable, but it is working, and therefore we stick to it. Here I have, I hope that you can see it, shown that there are different metrics. We have here modeled the federal state where we are living in, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern in Germany, with respect to peatlands, and we re-wet the area in 2010, I think it is, I don't see it yet. On top, you see what is happening with the CO2 balance. The CO2 balance almost immediately becomes negative and remains negative. You see what is happening with the carbon balance. It almost immediately becomes negative and it remains negative. It's a little bit less than the CO2 balance because you get methane, also a carbon source, out again. Then we see what global warming potential 100 looks like. It drops immediately and it stays constant. But if we look to the only viable matrix, that is radiative forcing, what the atmosphere sees, we see this remains positive all the time. Re-wetted peatlands remain warming the climate for hundreds of years. We can modify this a little bit, but this is the story. It reduces the emissions enormously. This orange field is the amount of emissions that are reduced by re-wetting between the baseline on top and the re-wetted situation at the bottom. As you reduce immensive, but it does not cool yet. The third thing is the problem of permanence. Permanence is an invention of foresters. Because if you plant a forest and you cut it, the carbon is back in the atmosphere. This is not the case with emission reductions. Not with peatland re-wetting. if it is rewetted, even when you reverse the activity, the emission reduction stays. Every emission reduction is permanent, even if the activity is later annihilated. 2 graphs to the left, you see in blue the rewetting and keeping it rewetted, and you see there is no increase in climate burden anymore. In red is the status quo, and then you have subsequently different scenarios that you rewet 10 years and drain again, rewet 20 years and drain again, rewet 30 years and drain again, and you see these project scenarios all remain below the baseline. Even if you rewet one day, you have a permanent reduction of the burden on the climate compared to the baseline. We even checked, and that is the right graph, that you rewet 10 years, then drain 10 years, rewet 10 years, drain 10 years, and that is this wiggle thing in between these 2 graphs. The lower graph, the blue one, is still the permanent rewetting. What is the color? I forgot it. The red one is the permanent drainage. You see that it goes up and down, but it remains below the baseline. That is very important to understand, because this is crucial for carbon farming, because it allows reversible reduction projects, and this is attractive. And that is what some people here are trying to implement, because we know that a short project, even with an initial negative climate effect of methane, you see that in the beginning with the red arrow, inevitably has a positive effect later. This is not the ex-ante rewarding of reductions, but the ex-post rewarding of efforts that inevitably bring mitigation. So we talk about, with CRCF, about ex-post rewarding, not about ex-ante. This is an ex-post rewarding of efforts that inevitably reduce the burden for the climate. The next problem is, what is actually a peat soil and an organic soil? We must, for CRCF on peat, distinguish peat soil, organic soils from mineral soils. But we do not have a worldwide standardized definition for that. No definition addresses the climate function of peat and organic soils. And the existing ones are wrong. They have been inspired by agricultural considerations. The depth of the plough is the main source of the definitions of a peat. This has nothing to do with the importance for the climate. We are using the wrong definitions. Because a 15 centimeter thick layer of peat may hold per hectare already more carbon than a high carbon stock tropical rainforest. And we all agree that we have to save a high carbon stock tropical rainforest for the climate. If that is so, we also have to safeguard peat layers of 10-15 centimeters. And that is the reason that the UNEP Global Peatland Assessment has encouraged countries to use peat layers thicker than 10 centimeters as the definition for peatlands in their policies. But if we would do that for the European Union, it would imply that the entire European Union, almost the entire European Union, has to be remapped. It is of course faster and more pragmatic to use existing definitions and existing mapping, but we must aware that we might be wrong, that we exclude opportunities for reducing emissions. So we must use existing maps, here the map that we just made for Lower Saxony, although we know it is wrong, but it is better to use a somewhat wrong map than not do anything at all. The next issue is that emission data have a wide range of uncertainty. That has to do with the fact that we are dealing with various greenhouse gases, with various site conditions, with various measurement methods, but also gap filling methods and interpolation methods. And we have in the literature an enormous amount of flaws in publications. With the first meta-analysis that we made in Greifswald in 2010, we had to get rid of 80% or 90% of all publications because they were not measuring long enough, they did not include biomass in the right way, etc., etc. There's a lot of rubbish outside in the literature, and you have to do quality control. This is of course such an issue. Who is going to define the emission factors and to validate the emission factors? I think for market reliability, we want to get money from the market. The product must be as reliable as possible. You cannot leave it to the project operators to develop their own emission factors. This has to have a quality control like we have done in the IPCC in the 2014 wetland supplement. A similar thing, quality control has to be centralized. We also know, and we have discussed this many times, that for standard monitoring on a large scale, doing 500,000 hectares of peatland rewetting every year in the European Union, the direct greenhouse gas measurements with chambers or with eddy covariance, etc., are too expensive. We need cost-effective proxies to bring that into the area. And we know by now, by a long experience, that the average annual water table depth is worldwide, everywhere, the best single predictor of emissions for peatlands. So if we have data about water level in peatlands, we have a good idea about the emissions. Also, land use has been a classical proxy for emissions. Actually, the entire IPCC guidelines based on land use, a little bit modified, cropland, forest land, grassland, you know, with settlement, wetlands, etc. This works. But even more accuracy, and interestingly also on a politically relevant and practice-orientated timescale of a year or several years, is reached with vegetation. Here we see this same graph again about the relationship, the linear relationship between average water table depth and CO2 emissions. And in these small graphs you see that this inclination of this relationship differs for different vegetation types. It appears to be that if something is moss covered, that it has with the same water table another emission. So we can modify, we can more make the emission factors more accurate on the basis of vegetation. And that is actually the method that we have developed over the last 15 years. That's the greenhouse gas emission site type model, the GEST model, in which we use vegetation, specific types of vegetation, vegetation forms, it's a classification system, to indicate emissions from peatland sites. So we know that land use, water table and vegetation are suitable for assessing greenhouse gas fluxes, and partly we can assess them increasingly with Earth observation, with remote sensing. Regretfully, if you really studied the issue, Earth observation is very promising, but it is not sophisticated enough to provide good proxy data for accurate greenhouse gas monitoring. It still needs additional information like land-based information, etc., etc. But it is, of course, very promising. Specifically multi-temporal and multispectral and different, not only satellite, but also with drones, etc., etc., opens up perspectives that will allow us to come up with much more accurate greenhouse gas emission values than at present. And this will go very quickly, I assume. Modeling is such a thing. A lot of models have been developed also in mineral soils, but also for peatland soils. But also there we have to conclude that no process-based model is yet able to monitor emission effects of landscape-wide rewetting. It is not so that the models are so wrong, but they all require so many input data that collecting these input data is impossible. We need to have easy collectible input data to put in a good model, and this is not working yet. Also, this will be a development, but if we have to wait for that, we can not implement as soon as we need it to be. Then we have the issue with baselines. I just have written for GRC an extensive report, hundreds of pages, about standardized baseline for peatlands. because the CRCF prescribes that it has to take into account physical, geographic conditions, social, economic conditions, and the whole bullshit. This is impossible. Don't try to solve all issues with one instrument. We have a lot of variables that are continuous, where we have to decide where to put the class boundaries and derive standardized baselines. I made this baseline into a star because it gets input from so many different disciplines that you have to combine that you must say the type and the number of classes are entirely arbitrary. So standardized baselines cannot be robust. Although this is prescribed in CRCF, it cannot be, I think. So this was a lot of complaining, and I want to come a little bit to preliminary solutions. How can we progress? With respect to the baseline, it is important that the baseline for market reliability must guarantee that a ton is a ton. We have already in accounting and reporting and UNFCCC the situation that different baselines are used, the forward-looking baseline, the reference level in forest management, compared, for example, with all other baseline of all other sectors. This brings on the market tons that have not the same value. You cannot have that. If you want to be taken seriously, then a ton must be a ton. And therefore, a baseline must be historic, it must be fixed. It must not be forward-looking based on a narrative that you can change. It should reward physical achievements, not social efforts. Of course, poor farmers have to be supported, but you should not do that via CRCF. You should do that via the CAP, like economic support programs, different prices based on additional achievements, like the mountain programs, etc., etc. But don't spoil a good market instrument with bad products. So you need a standardized baseline, and as we have to re-wet all drained peatlands within the next 20, 30 years, the European Commission could as well provide the baseline for all peatland parcels in the European Union themselves. Not all the same number, but differentiated for every single parcel on the basis of water table depth, soil conditions, management, etc., etc. This will allow a methodological consistency and provide transparency that is needed for the market. We want to go on the same level as the European Union emission trading system, with these prices and with this reliability. It will make the cumbersome validation of many different project baselines redundant. If every project is going to make its own baseline, you create a chaos on the market unless you guarantee that you have a trustworthy validation centralized. And that is much more work than do it from start yourself. It will therefore be much cheaper and much faster. I think that in the next months, a feasibility study should be made whether it is possible to make, on the basis of available data with water levels, vegetation mapping, Corinna, etc., a baseline map for all peatlands in the European Union. We have shown for Germany and some other countries and parts of countries that it is possible to come up with a rather reliable baseline. We should try to provide that for the projects. And projects that do not accept the standardized baseline can always develop an own project baseline, but then they have to pay it themselves. And that is always a balancing, of course, will it cost more or will it bring more? Of course, there is a bias when you can choose, that is correct, but making a good baseline, a trustworthy baseline, is also not cheap. Don't forget that. Permanence, emission reductions is inherently permanent, and this allows for reversible projects without losing the climate achievements of short-term projects. And this is an enormous important asset because this perceived irreversibility is the most important obstacle for rewetting of agricultural land. That is our experience over the last 15 years. Additionality. I say, forget additionality. As long as we are living in a world where rewetting is less than 5% annually of what is needed, you can simply deem all rewetting as additional. The mangrove people have done that. You can do that. Start to think about additionality after you have rewetted 30, 40 or 50% of the drained peatland area. Then it becomes relevant, because then you have completely changed economic and political situations. Don't do it now. Skip additionality. Rewetting. Emission factors have large uncertainties for various reasons that I just mentioned. So we need more greenhouse gas emission research and better site differentiation, which will decrease uncertainty, but some uncertainty will always remain. If you want to be entirely safe on the project level, you should only allow water level rise of at least 30 centimeters. But on a program, regional, national and European Union level, uncertainty will increasingly factor out and become less of a problem. And if you would like to avoid this discussion about sigmoid or linear, I think that the linear is the more right one. But if you want to avoid this discussion, then you have to rewet until at least minus 20 centimeters. Good. Emission data are poor in number, diverse and insufficiently harmonized, and the European Union should therefore incentivize gap-filling research and meta-analysis. Experts should analyze these things, provide best estimates for non-measured situations that you can use them in your projects, and recommend gap-filling research. We should allow flexibility in monitoring method. Everything that works, works. But water level and vegetation are still the best proxies. But you should stimulate methodological development, including of Earth observation. We have to keep in mind that reduction credits are no removal credits. Reduction credits will fade out in some decades because eventually remaining emissions can only be compensated by removals, not by reductions elsewhere, because everybody has to go to net zero. But reduction credits can provide income opportunity for farmers until wet production techniques, paludicultures, are self-sustaining. Methane, rejoice in methane emissions. They indicate that worse is being prevented. In the end, nothing is wrong with methane, and methane emissions can be neglected. You should use a default value, add-on value for initial methane emissions, first 10 years maybe, provided that methane reduction measures, removal of flush biomass, shallow topsoil removal, etc., have been taken. And you can skip this additional initial add-on for early movers because they had the methane problem in the past and not anymore. So, after our trip, Yuri went to the Vergeonsk mountains to collect medical stones because he decided, after being a professional surgeon, to become a shaman. And the year after when we came back, he appeared to have learned all the plant species of the tundra with their Latin names that he could also communicate with us. He learned me that the Dutch proverb is right. Zachte heelmeesters maken stinkende wonden. Soft doctors make stinking wounds. We need to take rapid and drastic action and explore new avenues. We must set out on the journey. We know the direction. We will find the right path on the way by following the pioneers, combining existing knowledge with new technologies, learning by doing, and being persistent, consistent, and transparent. Take your knife and start cutting. The pain will soon be over.
Yes, thank you very much for this very enlightening talk. We will now have questions now. We will have them later. I want to introduce the panelists. Of course, I don't need to introduce Hans to you anymore. He introduced himself now with this very nice presentation. But could you, for a short minute, sit here? Because we have a statement of the panelists before we go into the roundtables. I ask you. One by one, I wanted to say. Yes? So, and now I ask Lucia, who is also working for DG Clima and is like the expert for CRCF for peatlands, and will discuss from the viewpoint of the European Commission. Then we have Malte Schneider from the Aeco GmbH. He's actually one of the people that is like from not finance, but from the practical aspect, and really wants to do something as a startup in the field, and of course needs exact data and wants to therefore push the CRCF process. And we have Florence, Renou-Wilson, who is our Irish expert here on everything peatlands, especially on peatland soils, on greenhouse gas emissions from peatlands, and is also involved in these processes here in Ireland. Have a clapping for that. And we thought that it might be wise for all of the panelists to have one short statement to say what they want to drive and expect here. And of course, then you can take this within your round table or round circle discussions, and we will see where this guides us, and each one of them will go to one of the round circles and help you also with the discussion. So, Lucia, would you like to start?
Yeah. So I've been asked to reflect on communication and engagement, and how can we make the most out of CRCF, and how can we best communicate. And I kind of reflected a bit, and I keep it quite short. For me, it's kind of 3 key principles. And the first one is kind of build trust with the stakeholders, and we've been trying to do that from the beginning. So build on existing certification schemes, build on what works. The second principle, I would say, is engage early and continuously. So it's kind of be there from the beginning and really develop the CRCF methodology with what works on the ground, with the stakeholders, with the existing scheme. And the third one is really learn and adapt. So it's really about starting, as Hans said, starting now, learning and developing and making it better as we go along. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Malte, now it's your turn.
Yeah, thanks. I'll add to one of your pain points, but I think it's important. Peatlands is many parcels together because it's a hydrological catchment area, so you have many owners and maybe even a few farmers, and you need to convince them all together. I think that adds additional complexity to what we see in other project categories. And that makes it even more important to be simple and start and reward those projects, I think, that get going now, practically, pragmatically, and then I think we need to be ready by 2030 with lots of sort of things that simplify and that help us to roll it out with sort of approved emission factors for every region, etc. But we need to get going pragmatically and then learn over time until 2030.
Thank you, Malte. Now, Hans, your turn.
I have all the time talked already.
Yes.
I have said everything. My simple message is always that peatlands have to be wet as soon as possible, and you have to get rid of the hurdles that prevent that, and be pragmatic in that. We might not know every detail, but we know the general things, and we can learn. We should not let the better be the enemy of the good.
Yes, that's, I think, is a good statement. And Florence, do you have also a short statement for us?
A very short one. As you said, we've heard a lot of things at this conference, but peat soils are even more special. You know, all the problems, all the things you've heard, I think we can multiply that by 10. I know there's solutions there. I know we need to stop, but we have a lot of problems. They're special. Irish peat soils are even extra special. Really, really, really. And I may discuss that afterwards. But what I found from our Irish experience is that, and in the context of the schemes here, the CRCF, is that I don't think the scheme is taken into account the issue of heterogeneity at different scales, landscape scales, regional landscape and field. And we have this issue in Ireland we've come across, and we need to know exactly, I know you had some very good idea about baseline, but we need to know what we have before farmers move in, and what we have at the moment is a patchwork of things that could go really in all sorts of directions, and I want to address this before we get too far. I think we need to address the heterogeneity, which is important at different scales. Right from the field all the way to the landscape, which in Ireland is important. I shall, just for those who don't know, we have a fifth of this country is actually peat soils. So it's a lot.
Yes, thank you very much. And now there are coming up these discussion points, and I read them while the people now come to their circles. Also, the people here on the right can watch their circles. There are 4 circles in the room. You can see them. They are not perfect circles. It's like with peatland rewetting. Yeah? Don't let the perfect the enemy of the good. We just start. So find your circles. And also the panelists will go into the circles, and the people that end up with Hans will discuss what are the main challenges in CRCF processing and development. How can we overcome them? Where Lucia is ending up, where you will talk about how can communication at all levels improve the CRCF policy implementation. What communication strategies have proven most effective? I keep them here so you can always look them up. And the group that ends up with Malte will discuss why is it important to have well-developed CRCF schemes, what factors are key to successful CRCF implementation, and Florence group will discuss how does data availability and sufficiency affect CRCF implementation, how can we improve it. Don't be shy, just find your circle and see which panelist ends up with you and discuss the question that is on the board. Here in front, you cannot discuss anything. Yeah. So these circles are not perfect, as I said. You have approximately 25 minutes to discuss this. Keep it, yeah. So don't make introductions, just start discussing the question.
What are the main challenges? Not mention one of them.
I have a question. Well, you actually mentioned it before, but I think we should talk a little bit more. Let's say people are coming to the complexity of that they actually generate some nutrition credit from this. Then who's going to buy them? Like, how do you make companies want to buy credit from people? Yes, who's going to buy the credit that we generate?
We know that we have some carbon credits programs that will close it, and we only have more demand than we can deliver.
Okay.
There's a lot of demand for credits, simply because we have brought it a little bit in the picture.
Don't have that demand in our market. On the forestation.
Yeah, we should do that. Meaning that forestation
I'm a big fan of rewetting.
analysis that was published in the Guardian a year ago.
All the other stakeholders are punished for
No, but it has to do with forest. We simply know that in the demand for credits is much larger than
It's not the case where stopping this source. It's a source. There's a source that we say, well, temporarily stop this source. I can recognize it.
So the question is, it gets really hard to explain why not operating for months should not receive
which are not properly
credits
they have some
just before not, and others like this, but they are getting credits and they because they are
public authorities in order to
but everyone is hard to pay for this and can receive
for example, I have
compensation for not doing
this
this sector that is not
I want you to have
but
okay,
seeks to
I'm
receive
giving you money, you are
compensation for not doing. So this was the issue.
down on
So we see that ETS wanted to extend private
you estimate the credit and I'm paying you and you give me the credit.
so everybody is now kind of finding and emitting, but this sector is saying, well, we are emitting and we stop emitting if you pay.
there is often a confusion around people. Organic soil. So also on my tool, private organizations, etc., etc. And we are not necessarily thinking about they also have to be re-wetted, but this is the task of these conservation organizations. We are talking about non-great fields for dairy husbandry, for mice cultivation, for energy, or for crops or fruits, etc., for potatoes on feed, carrots on feed, etc., etc. This type of thing. Because these are huge emissions. For example, big re-wetting projects in Scotland. First, these are simple to re-wet because there is no opportunity. Secondly, they do not bring so much reduction. You have to go to the core of the issue. That is the then you can reduce, but this is also very difficult because also like farmers that are 2,000 euros per hectare per year comes down. But at the same time, they make minor damage of 5, 6, 7, 8,000 euros. For him, macroeconomics.
Now the question changing to the climate part. One solution for the warm climate is rice fields. This, for example, you have peatlands and you have rice fields, so you keep them wetted, you have production is still there. In the northern counties, this is not the case. But it's possible to create infrastructure against. So there is to have aquaculture, shallow aquaculture.
And I think that's the challenge.
I will always reckon you have to take into account that you get saturated forms methane. The benefit of re-wetting grain fields is to exchange the CO2 source for a methane source. If you have mineral soil, and you make the wetland out of it, you do not get this reduction of CO2. But only generation. So from the climate perspective, it lies at such a way, it lies on middle.
So all of that is on the table, but it's a challenge that goes down. But also with other systems like from the beginning, 20 years down the phase, in the beginning they were given the certificate of spring. And then they were trading among them, they said initially they were given nothing happened. All the farmers were employed by government to drain the peatlands, and now we turn around in society and say to the second individual farmers who are not making lots of profits, pay huge amounts, as we said, for their fields, for their farms. So socioeconomically, it's impossible to survive them all. So we need to, in one case, show a clear pathway to say, we need to, you can be supported when you start now, at a certain point in time that will stop. And you can be punished or use the time to establish wet agriculture or abandon that time.
So if we do that, we also see like what projects are available on a national scale.
But I think the challenge is that, I mean, there's others as well.
Water level, groundwater level, and then that's okay to accepting that we're not maybe not shall be specific acronym, but you've got so would you accept that you maybe take some say you take some assumption, but you always go to your conservative side instead of like make sure the weather is but if you always go to your conservative side.
We look at a very good instrument for dealing with the soil. And if you want to sell specific market credits, and you are not completely sure that that's conservative, otherwise you go to the border of uncertainty that certainly happened. On the other hand, certainly works in two directions. So if you have, like with throwing a dime, and if you do it once, the chance that you get a 6 is So if you have much more pressure, and that is because what
By the way, I'm just noting that now I'm sitting on the panel and I think one of the collective questions we asked on this panel just have yes and formulated in a more rigorous way. Because straight up there, that's fine.
owner of a specific operation that he is getting paid for each individual, then it's of course a risk. But justice in agriculture is not.
Yeah. Then we go like that combination of saying, if peak is above the groundwater level from a map, then we actually have a we raise the water level, then we actually have an amount. If the groundwater level is low, or being low, and also those on the map, then we don't. So you do combine the national level actually measures. We don't have time to put out water level emissions that should be there because we have variations over the year, and even variation from year to year. So
But maybe formulating it for the social question is that completely agree, and for us here's X euro per hectare. But we also renewable biomass data that wants to use X, Y, Z. We need to take the biomass around these terms in the next 4 or 5 years. If we change within the double, it would be like a domino cheese. At least the farmer would do it.
Depending on what kind of hydrological data you have.
The owner's point of view might be that different. If I may, so the business model that is all population that has there's a few marginal levels there where it makes sense, maybe already the carbon and some different the sites where you have your vegan cows or your dairy products, so organic milk producer over there, that's probably ain't gonna work with it. So carbon plus biomass,
So, folks, people, we are at the end of the roundtable discussion. Yes, we have to bring it around. So, yes, of course, we need more time, I know that. But I would ask the panelists to come back to the front, to return to the panel. And now we will have the panel discussion. And I hope this was, in a way, refreshing and also engaging for all of you, that you could directly already now talk to the panelists. And yes, I'm waiting for them to come back. And I would be very happy now if don't take it with you, Florence. They should do it. They should. We will try to figure out. So now before we ask the panelists. We want to have the rounds. Tell us, we have a room microphone. Tell us the important takeaways they had from their discussion. In answer of the questions that we had on the screen. Yeah, just go to them and find someone who's telling you, yes, to this group. Somebody wants it? Yeah, we are very spontaneous here, that's good. Yeah, the room microphone is up.
Does it work?
Yes.
Oh, cool. We had a question on why it is important to have well-developed CRCF schemes and what factors are key to successful CRCF implementation. And, well, this is really difficult to read. One point is not top-down, but to work bottom-up, so together with the landowners and the farmers. I really can't read this. Alignment of what?
Yes.
Important is planning security also in the long run. So what happens after you revet for a couple of years? Is there planning security? Then of course, question is what is the business model behind? This would be important as a factor for successful implementation. And what is clear communication around? What does it mean? Do you remember?
Yeah, but it's a good thing. Clear communication. Clear communication.
That's indeed true.
Because that brings me. I will shift to the next. I will shift to the next group up there. To the we call it the communication group. What did you come up with? Like, what is important for the effective communication? What is your talking points that we can bring to the discussion right now?
Okay, so our question was, how can communication at all levels improve the CRCF policy implementation? So what we have written is kind of simplicity and clarification between policies, speaking with a degree of certainty or honesty, acknowledging the unknowns. Inaction causes a level of distrust and a kind of, with information sitting in the ether, things can kind of breed underneath, which makes more issues. And we kind of have a bit of a statement that we probably need a lot more explaining. Would be to kind of make incentives worthwhile and advertisable in terms of that would lead in with communication. And then the secondary question, which we didn't really get around to, was what communication strategies have proven most effective? And it's a bit general, but kind of the bottom-up or regional approach to this kind of communication is key.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I think that sounds very good. So we turn now to the big round, and there was nothing written down, so I hope. Elisabeth did something, that's good.
Well, yeah, I think I can summarize very quickly from my understanding from the discussion. One challenge which had different view was the demand and it's unclear that in some countries there's a lot of demand, maybe in others the demand is not there. So maybe it's about the whole system to develop the demand. We didn't find a solution for this one, but the second biggest challenge is the lack of data and what to do with those regions that cannot apply the guest approach. And the conclusion I take was that, okay, we have the guess which works and is robust because we cannot expect to gather data for 3 years. It's not viable. And then the suggestion is that the EU Commission will take this role of filling the gaps in the guest, because ultimately all the peatlands need to be re-wet, and it's an investment, and this can only happen by experts. So the role of project developers maybe and countries is to provide the data and then see what can be done. But if somebody else wants to add.
I think that's fine already, because we go now to the round in there.
Okay, Flo's rating's better than mine, but mine is diabolical. So, first of all, we talked. Our question was, how does data availability and sufficiency affect CRCF implementation? So, one thing we talked about was that, do we have enough data to start at least? Is there enough to say, okay, let's start and let's improve that baseline? We talked about adaptive management in that, and seeing if we can shift it as we move. Others in the group disagreed and said, well, we don't have enough spatial data in particular, that there is so much heterogeneity in how these bogs exist and act and how they have been managed in the past, that being able to quantify the uplift or the change in the emissions of those lands will be very difficult, especially when trying to embed it in CRCF. Some legal queries around appropriate assessment and how we must know the positive outcome will occur, and in most cases we can't actually definitively say that. So we may actually be contravening our additionality there, certainly in terms of protection. But then queries around additionality being both legal and financial, and that in some of these cases, yes, there may be existing legal obligation, but the finance isn't there, and therefore if we can provide the finance from elsewhere, then it does become additional. So that's a positive. We spoke briefly about the sigmoid curve and the straight line curve, and that some of the more recent work in Denmark has showed a reinforcement of the sigmoid model, which is, good or bad, depending on how you look at it. Again, coming back to not having enough data, but also in some cases having too much data that's simply not interoperable or combined, in that it's sitting in servers elsewhere doing nout. That's us, I think.
Yes, thank you very much. That gives us a lot of things to think, and I hope we can bring it to some questions to the panelists. I would like to ask you, making the round really, that you tell us about. There was this. A lot of things are still uncertain. We talk about the right model and so on. So how can we communicate in a sense of certainty about uncertain things? How we do that effectively, and therefore I. Like to ask Florence first, and then go just over the line. Just short answers. What do you think? What can be done about it?
Okay. I was just actually making the point of all the data would show that we have this huge uncertainty with our degraded peatlands. Once they are re-wetted, they are not as resilient as normal peat soils, and there is this huge interannual variability. On top of that, we're going to have climate change. So Ireland, even though we are the northwest border, but we're actually getting drought as well in the summer, whereas some parts of Ireland we're getting even wetter. So how do you add that on top of it? We can work with it. It's just it needs to be integrated into this scheme, and I don't think it's integrated enough. Brushing it off is not going to help. We need to integrate it and then move on. Not to stifle the whole scheme, but to make sure it's there and we're aware of it and we can be transparent about it and not ignore it.
Yeah, thank you. How can we communicate in a certain certainty about uncertainty? How we do that so that it's effective and not intransparent?
Uncertainty is an invention of scientists. It's the most important instrument of science. You have to doubt as a scientist. In real life, politicians have to decide, even on the basis of incomplete information. And the most important thing is that you recognize that not deciding is also deciding. It is deciding that it remains like it is. And we do not want to remain like it is and go into the wrong direction. So we have to take some risks, not too large. It is the same as walking in a peatland. If you come in front of an unknown peatland and you want to cross it, you also do not know what problems you are going to encounter. You only know the direction, and you have to start walking and find the problems and solve them when they are there. And of course you must be careful, and that is the way we have to start. Of course there is a very good discussion about the model that you say, it is real. I do not put this away. But nobody says that emissions are decreasing when you drain peatlands deeper. Unless you drain them to such an extent that it is dry peat, then it will also not oxidize anymore. But that is in a landscape unthinkable. So we simply have to start. There is nothing wrong with making peatlands wetter. It is a non-regret thing. There are some dips with nitrous oxides in specific levels, etc., but this is not a large deviation. So we know the direction, and we should start, because the challenges are enormous. What is in front of us, if we do not get this under control, is beyond imagination, I think. We have seen many examples in the last years. We should not want to have that. We should get starting, and of course put all our efforts to make the database better and to think about things. My experience is that emissions from peatlands, also internationally, are much more consistent than I thought 20 years ago. That there is much more rule in it if you understand the processes. So you should dare to go.
Malte, what do you say about this?
It's a good question.
Uncertainty?
I'll just, we are talking about large uncertainty, but super small volumes of carbon credits that would come out of this now. Because the amount of peatlands that are being re-wetted is, I can't even communicate it. If I compare it to the 500,000 hectares per year until 2050, it's like I'm going to a doctor and I'm asking for homeopathic medicine. We need to get going and learn, and I think the uncertainty that we're not hitting it right is offset so much by what we learn in the process, because it's not just the data that's the problem. We need to learn how we scale up that process, how we get permits right, how we convince landowners, farmers, etc. All of that is holding us back, and we need to, while the volumes are small, just get on and learn all of the rest and improve on the data side while we're doing it. So that's something that I feel super strongly about, because really this greenwashing, fear, etc., yes, it's real, but we're increasing the knowledge base a lot, and a few thousand tons or even 10,000 tons, if you compare it to, you know, the problems and the quantities, even on the carbon market, which in itself, the voluntary one is minuscule, it's negligible compared to the learnings we will get. And by 2030, I would say, we need to be ready, yeah, and solid and sober and so on. The second thing that I want to say is there's a lot of uncertainty about what happens if you do it. There's quite some uncertainty also about how smart it is to keep things as they are. The current cap schemes is only 5 years. Will I be supported in the way that there was for drained peatland management? Will my soil be gone at a certain point in time? Will then still be the support available that helps me transition to wet agriculture, etc. So there's, for farmers and owners, not doing anything is also pretty uncertain, I would say.
Yes, thank you. Lucia?
Yeah, no, a lot of wise words still. So I think for me it's really just learning and taking the first step. I think sometimes we have been bogged down in getting it right, getting it perfect, and kind of that can be paralyzing, you know, kind of but I think we have enough, as Hans also demonstrated in his talk, we have enough evidence of moving forward. And I think what we can bring from the Commission is really getting the MRV, so the measuring and the emission factors, right, and providing it out there and working on that is the first instance to make this scalable for operators. Because as the challenge is huge, but I think we are determined to make the first step. So not be put off by the uncertainty would be my message.
Yes.
But can I just add, we really need, one thing we need to reduce the uncertainty is the what we start with. That we can, because we can do it, we can measure it, and not skip that, because that is...
With the baseline.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think we had this very interesting suggestion by Hans to go off the baseline on the European level, which is really a huge task, but maybe doable, and of course then it's also comparable. But that is also my next question somehow. What can we learn from existing schemes? So there are already some around, like More Futures or the UK Carbon Code and these kind of things. Is it possible to learn from them to develop the general CRCF certification, or do we have to start from scratch? And that's the next question I want to pose all of you. Is it wise to take existing ones and just adapt a little bit and then go for it? Because of course they are developed differently for different regions. There was also this go regional, start from the region. Or should we strive to, is it a good idea? So that's the question, to start from existing stuff and just try to make it better. And I start now with Malte in the middle, and then we spread out to the sides.
It's always good to start somewhere, because if we start from scratch, we'll be here in 2030 talking about the first step. So I would say let's go with what we have. And like I said before, for me 2030 is a good and practical timeline. I think by then we need to have more sort of streamlined views around how it works. If the More Futures or UK Peatland Code, I guess they need to adhere to a few procedural points, etc., that would make them CRCF compatible. If we can figure something out that makes these schemes CRCF compatible for the time being, and then we learn from their experiences and maybe sort this out then and have it more streamlined or homogeneous in 2030, that would be one way. There's one thing though, I think, where you can come in with a CRCF and inject some dynamics in that the existing schemes, at least some of them, are quite complex because the voluntary carbon markets, especially the international ones, have been under fire quite a bit, speaking about permanence and so on. So there's lots of things you need to do, lots of papers and tests, etc. So maybe the CRCF could say, a push towards some simplification here would be, I think, very appreciated to get this to scale.
I take this up because you directly already talked in the direction of Lucia, and therefore I would ask her to follow what she's answering to that.
No, sure. I think it's exactly the line we're trying to walk between complexity and credibility. So making a CRCF standard, or defining minimum that could be applied across the EU. So with the knowledge of having different peatlands in different European countries, still defining a minimum, and that's why we had those quality criteria, that it would be a credible label that you could do. But at the same time, the challenge is, of course, not to make it so cumbersome that it's not taken up. And I think that's why learning from actually what also doesn't work on the voluntary market and what the issues are there, it's very valuable for us.
I would turn this question now to Florence before I come to Hans.
Yeah, so we are developing, and Shane might want to say something more about that, in Ireland, a peatland code. But what I wanted to say is, and again, sorry, I'm the devil's advocate here. I agree with everything you're saying. No, I'm just, one point is, in Ireland there's no peatlands that exist by themselves without the people. Peatlands and people were always being together. So separating them, for me, any peatland carbon farming peatlands will have to be synonym with sustainable peatland management, which means the sustainability part, which means people, as well as water, as well as biodiversity. So that's the bit. I know it makes things complicated, but we can't take them out. We can't have the people on one side and the carbon bit on the other. That's all I would say for this question, because I think you have more experience.
Yes, I would like weigh in a little bit here, because our final workshop for a MOCA project, which was peatland climate protection via building capacities for the experts and so, and it was people make peatlands. That was our claim, and I think I agree completely that peatlands and people have to be thought of together, and I think also Hans will agree on that. But now back to the question, that we asked beforehand. I forgot. Can we learn from existing approaches, and is this a wise thing, or should we invent the wheel new?
Yeah, we always have to learn from existing projects. Already More Futures, when we started, this was actually informed by parallel developments in the Climate Convention, the introduction of wetland drainage and rewetting in the Kyoto Protocol, simultaneously the development of the Wetland Supplement 2013 of the IPCC, and the application of peatland rewetting in the verified carbon standard. And then we said this is such a complex system. For example, verified carbon standard is so complex and also so expensive. If you want to apply that on a small project in Germany, then the calf is larger than the cow, as we say. It costs more than it brings. So we have to simplify it, which is also possible because Germany is a very well-regulated country with a lot of laws, and if they decide the water level has to go up and you write that in the cadastre, then it will not change for the coming 100 years, or 200 years, or whatever, until Putin comes, something like that. Of course, the most important thing, what we did when we created More Futures, we wanted to be more Catholic than the Pope, because it was the first scheme in which carbon credits from peatland rewetting were created, with which we really rewetted peatlands. And there was a lot of criticism, because whereas nobody had ever thought about methane in the Climate Convention, the forest is not, the grassland people not, as soon as we with peatlands can, then suddenly methane became a problem. So we wanted to be very strict and very clear. I think it is not necessary to be so strict anymore. Yes. We have learned that we can do things also in a more flexible way. That is not wrong. So we can learn it. But the most important thing for More Futures is not the amount of carbon credits that we have realized. It is a communication tool. The most important thing of More Futures is that we showed to people that peatland emissions cost money. And if you want to reduce that it costs money and it brings money. That emissions from peatlands have a value. Yeah. And that's why we are now continuing with that. That is important to scale this up.
It seems like you read my mind somehow, because my next question, and also the last question we can always ask so many questions here, is how important is branding? So how important, because you brought up this More Futures issue, that it was actually a good communication tool. So how important is branding in getting these things in effect, getting it accepted, getting people to be involved and accepting what we are doing here? And of course I go the round again. Short answers, please. Yeah, and some thoughts about it. You can already use this one and put your biggest takeaways into the word cloud, and we will have a look at it afterwards. But now I will start from where I didn't start yet. I'm starting with you, Lucia. And then we go just around to the right. And with this, how important is branding to really make it effective?
Okay, you mean the CRCF branding, or?
Yeah, or of some codes, whatever, yeah. Like how you call it, how you communicate about it.
Okay. I mean, for me, it's kind of branding in the sense of setting the standard, and that the market and the buyers know what the label, or what stands behind the label. In that sense, I think branding is important to get clarity and to get the buy-in.
Yeah. Okay, Malte?
I think it can potentially be super important if the CRCF brand sort of stays, and I think it stands for some degree of certainty and long-termism. And if that can be communicated to the farmer, look, hey, or the owner, this is here to stay, this is EU strategy. They might not all love the EU in the rural parts, but it's here to stay, and it takes longer, these things, than the current cap periods. I think that might trigger them to take a leap.
Okay.
Yeah, we had a Dutch advertisement, I forgot for what, but it was sounding, quality is our brand. I think the quality is most important, and that is branding itself.
Yes.
Simply branding a thing without showing that it has quality, both consistency but also operationality, doesn't make any sense. You must make a good product,
Sure.
and then it will sell itself. And branding is an instrument for that,
Yes.
but the quality is most important.
So like trusted brands, so to say. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I don't know anything about branding. Sorry, I went to the wrong school. I went to a farming school where I would say what's important is the words you're using. The words you're using, not the branding. I don't know what branding actually is.
Yeah, but it's the words you're using.
Yeah,
actually.
but the words you're using in Germany might not be the same we'll be using here. That's
Yeah.
what I want to say, and we're all on the same boat here, so anyway, that's my branding.
Yeah,
That's it.
that was very nice. Anyway, we are on the same boat, yes. And I also liked what you said before, like that we are bogged down in something. That was also very nice. I think.
That's a negative language
Yes.
we want to stop.
Yes.
Once and for all, stop the negative language
Yes.
around wetlands.
That's true. We have to have positive language. It's
Yes.
also kind of branding.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'm curious what is like behind those votings. Could you please, IT, put it on the screen? What people have written, what are their biggest takeaways? Because of course we are all interested in what this is. Yes, it's hard for the people on the panel to see that. While it's bringing up, you can say your biggest takeaways. I'm starting with Hans. Short,
I'm
biggest
hungry.
takeaway.
I'm hungry.
It's been a long day, yes.
Yes.
Cut it short.
Yeah, there's
Oh,
investment required. Oh,
yeah, that's the thing.
yes, we need to begin. We'll figure the quantification of goods versus bad later on. Yes. Bring it on. Understanding the importance of people and peatlands to properly convey the message. People and peatlands. Yes, I agree. What else? People, peatland potential, or PPP. Yeah. Don't underestimate peatland literacy. I completely also agree. We have to educate not only scientists, researchers, and politics, but also the general public. Yes. Need to value the rewetting of peatlands sufficiently to make it work. So €200 per ton CO2 equivalent.
I don't even know where that question came from.
So there are some people that have exactly the right values in mind. Get moving on imperfect information, later perfected. I think really, Hans, your message is sticking here. That's good. Next one. My biggest takeaway is that there is a conflict in the peatland restoration community between action and ensuring good practice. I think,
Peatland restoration, that's it.
but I think peatland, I think action is good. And of course, on the way, we will figure out how to get better even over time. That would be my takeaway. There's another slide. And we will end with thanking the panel. I want to have a big applause. If you want to talk more about peatlands, if you want to talk about restoration, rewetting, and everything in paludiculture, please don't miss RRR, not PPP. 2025, where we talk about renewable resources from wet and rewetted peatlands. So there's a QR code where you can get more information. The abstract deadline ends on 14th of March, so there's still a week to go to write an abstract and to come to Greifswald to discuss peatlands issues further. Thank you very much for your participation, and hopefully a really nice dinner in the evening.